Hello and welcome to an evening with Comrades. Tonight we have with us Socialism or Barbarism.
What up?
We have with us Pac-Man.
We're fucking back!
We have also with us on his lunch break, Eugene.
Hey, I'm eating a literal fucking bowl of borscht and grilled sandwiches at the moment. I'm having a fucking moment of my lifetime. What up, people?
And we also have with us Spoogs and shit.
In pain.
Oh dear. I will be your host tonight, TK Jones. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit us up on Facebook and easternmarshlands.com for everything Eastern Marshlands. Lads,
Like this video, ram a plane into that like button.
Remember to smash that motherfucking like button.
Smash it like the state, boys.
Ooh.
Why are you in pain, Spoogs? What is this?
I'm always in pain, mate.
Did you watch the Jason Unruh and Muke debate too?
Oh,
Yeah, I did.
yes. This is what I wanted us to start on because I haven't actually watched it yet.
Don't.
Oh, it's that bad?
It's fucking horrendous.
I don't know what you're talking about, dude. I thought it was the greatest thing I've ever seen.
It was only good when Jason walked out. He just said, "Fuck it, I'm out." That was like the best bit. But like
comedy gold.
It really was though. The entire debate though is literally just Jason. No, sorry. Usually it's Muke starting off. It's like, oh, you see, it's not socialist because commodity production. And Jason's like, oh, it's in a different context, so it's not capitalist. And then just do that like back and forth, like 40 fucking minutes until eventually Jason just.
Like, the whole video is literally just them. Like the whole video is literally just about how they want to label like the same self-evident phenomenon, basically. Like the entire thing was just completely fucking pointless. It's like, okay, we both agree that like, because they both come to the conclusion that like, value generated by by workers under the Soviet style of socialism is extracted, and that surplus goes to society at large at the end of the day in indirect ways through like healthcare and roads and shit like that. But like the entire argument was just, are we going to call that socialism or not? And like it was really just pointless.
It's just fucked.
I watched it. Just an argument over semantics.
I watched it, and all I basically heard was essentially, I don't want to be too cruel, seeing as I'm discovering that I like the immortal science more and more every day, rather scarily. But even I had to admit that basically from Unruh, it basically, in a strange turn of events, Unruh is actually preaching revisionism, and it's kind of like, wow.
Yeah.
I was like, whoa. And, like,
what's the thing? Because like Muke was coming at it from like an orthodox or like classical Marxist standpoint. And Unruh obviously is a massive fucking tanky, which is obviously like, they describe it as like building upon like the old classical Marxist thing. So the idea of like tankies whining about revisionism is always just hilarious to me.
Yeah, because like even if you look at the dictionary, revisionism basically means looking at the evidence, like looking at the facts and providing different ideas and solutions that are still scientific. So like revisionism technically is not really bad because you're just looking at the same problem in a different way, which is still relevant and reasonable. Right? It's like there are historical revisionists who are like, for example, discussing different aspects of like why certain events happened, and so it's scientific, it's normal, it's okay, it's still how to say it, provable or disprovable, right? And like this sort of mere revisionism doesn't like really work because Marxism Leninism is literal revisionism of Marxism.
Yeah.
So get the fuck out. You know what I actually good point. Like this whole debate didn't make sense because it was really a semantics debate. If you boil it down to the basics, I believe that a better like discussion topic would be not like if Soviet Union was socialist or not, but rather what sort of economic planning systems we would like to implement that would be different and better.
Yeah,
and
that was the thing
how
with
do we
me. Like the whole.
Like it's the problem of democratization of capital. Like, how do we make this surplus extraction under socialism more democratic?
That was the thing
like,
with
even
me.
if
like the whole the whole was the Soviet Union socialist just question in general. Like, I could see like the arguments for both sides because it's like, I mean, neither side was like wrong, I guess, in that debate. Like, Meek didn't say anything that was like wrong. I mean, not really. I mean, like, we can argue if it qualifies as capital or not based on like, Marx's definition from 150 fucking years ago. But I mean, like I said, it is just, the value generated, that surplus being spread around. I mean, that's the case. But like, and again, they both agree on that, but they're just arguing over how they want to label that. But I think the more productive discussion, I was going to make my own video where I say these things, but I think I'll just talk about it here now that we're talking about it. I think a more productive discussion, instead of was the Soviet Union socialist, I think a better discussion, a more productive discussion would be, was the Soviet Union a dictatorship of the proletariat? You see what I'm getting at?
Yeah. I was thinking the same thing.
Fuck off.
I was thinking the same thing along that line because my biases is more towards libertarian socialism, although I'm not an anarchist. I just sort of lean more to the less government rounding up people and shooting them.
You just said that every day you were leaning more towards the immortal science, and then all of a sudden you talk about...
I'll stand for literally nothing. I think
you stand for everything at the same time.
I'm left unity, so I suppose yes. I guess.
There it is. Yeah.
But it's a thing. I lean towards more libertarian socialism, but at the same time, I'm also sort of, I don't know how to put it. I've been reading a lot of Rosa and a lot of Lenin lately, so.
Well, you're a trot, and like trots a lot of them do kind of walk that fine line of like Leninist versus libertarian socialist type.
Yeah, the only problem is, even though I'm agreeing with lots of Trotsky's theories recently, at the same time, I'm starting to dislike him even more as an actual person, because he sounds like a smug, uptight piece of shit, and it really, really, really is starting to annoy me.
Sounds like a socialist alternative.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe they are the true trots, and I've been wrong the whole time. That's gonna ruffle a few jimmies. No, but in all seriousness, to get back on topic, I think that the biggest reason why I was leaning towards Muke or Zegzizi or whatever he's called now, I don't know. The reason I'm leaning towards him is purely because of lots of his videos in which he discusses Marxism in the modern context. All of this is superfluous. It's completely superfluous and it's completely useless. How we can adapt and push forward the doctrine of Marxism and socialism for the modern age is the most important discussion we should be having.
Well, the thing with Muke, when I saw the video, I didn't go into that debate with like any sort of dog in that fight, I guess, because I don't particularly identify with either party. I guess of the two of them, I have more in common with Muke, but that's just kind of by default because like I'm not a fucking third worldist, and I don't think anybody's a third worldist at this point. In fact, I'm not even sure Unruh is a third worldist at this point. Didn't he say?
I'm pretty sure. I think he might actually probably just be a capitalist at this point. But
no, I feel
so yeah, I have more in common with Muke than I do with Jason Unruh, but I still have my fair share of disagreements with him. But what was I gonna say? It's I don't think that any reasonable person can say that like Jason Unruh won that debate. I mean, it was pretty much let's be honest, he kind of embarrassed himself. He was like stuttering and he was like just like kind of yelling and talking over Muke, and like Muke was just like, I don't know if you guys caught it, he was just kind of like laughing under his breath the entire time.
He was like, I have all the in front of me, I have all the sources in front of me. You really cannot defeat me right now because like this doesn't make sense. I have the proof. Like Muke was really prepared for the debate. That's the point.
It was especially fun for me watching because it reminded me, when I heard Muke laughing, it reminded me so much of my debate with Jason, because I just like, you guys couldn't hear it on the video, but I was just fucking, you guys don't know. Like I literally did everything in my power to not just burst out laughing when we were filming that video. Holy shit. I don't even remember what you did. Like maybe it's like on camera or not. I'm not sure. I don't quite remember. It's been a long time, but just some of the shit that like he said, and some of the shit he said to like his little toady friend he brought into that debate with him was just fucking hilarious.
It seems like when he's doing his Maoist Rebel News, he's in sort of a bubble where he'll trail off a little bit and then suddenly come back to like, oh no, but it's this is my view on it. This is Maoist Rebel News. In that moment where he trails off in a debate, suddenly, well, Muke can do it. He can say, well, according to this source, you're wrong.
Hang on. The one thing that really got me the other day was I have crossed off my bucket list. I actually met Jason Unruh myself the other day.
You went to Canada?
No, not in real life. Actually, fortunately,
Australia. He hunted crocodile.
Yeah, he
with them for the Third World perpetuated
Jason
People's War.
Who hunted, raped, and murdered his girlfriend, whose bloodlust could not be satiated. He then went to Australia to hunt crocodiles.
No,
Yes.
No, I spoke to old mate Jason actually on the Finnish Bolshevik server, believe it or not, just hanging out. And I didn't say much to him. I just said hi and I saw the debate and yada yada. But I then sat in and listened and I just watched. I watched the Third World International split in half before my eyes.
This was the Maoist versus Dengist shit fight, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, and it was absolutely fucking hysterical. I just sat back and
watched. How did I not hear about this?
Why was I not there?
Oh, I was in Pinball server, so
before we continue, can somebody just clear this up for me? Are like Dengist and shit like actually a thing now?
They are. Yes.
Because I hear a lot about people like complaining about Dengist. And I always just assumed that like Dengism was just the bullshit that like the modern Chinese government spouts and no one takes it seriously. Yeah. But are there actually like a serious amount of people who consider themselves Dengists now or something?
Yeah, there are.
Like, is that a thing we have to deal with?
That modern China is socialist because the capitalist class is actually under control of the People's Party. And so People's Party can overrule any decisions by the private industry, and they control private industry. And so it basically means that it is people's capitalism. So it is socialism.
Holy shit.
Oh, fuck. The contradictions of
it is literally you know that meme where Porky's taking off it's the other way around where like a Soviet ball is taking off a mask and revealing Porky. That's exactly how I see the Chinese system right now. It's just like, yes,
it's okay, guys. Capitalism is an important step to set up the working class. So let's do that, and then, yeah.
I'm working on my own theory.
And the aim of socialism or communism, it's something like where every person in the world knows his own place, and it's like very like Confucian mysticism together with modern reading of this. So basically, it's class collaborationism to the
descendants of Mao are using Confucian logic is just that irony is just multiple levels of irony we're operating on.
How many layers of irony are you on, my dude? Oh, I'm using Confucian logic to
Okay, so
legitimize the communist class rule.
Yeah, going back to something that I said earlier, I think we should really be asking ourselves if the Soviet Union qualifies as a dictatorship of the proletariat and not whether it qualifies as socialist. Because if we're going to argue over whether it's socialist, then we're literally just arguing over labels that don't matter. Because it's just what kind of classification do we want to file the same thing under that we all recognize. But like, getting more into the nitty gritty of like Soviet life and like, the power dynamic between like individual workers and the party and whatnot, I think that's really the more kind of fundamental issue. And I think that's really the fundamental issue that underlines the was it socialist or not question. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. And I think that's very, very sort of that's not nearly enough attention is being paid to it on that front. There's an anarchist writer who wrote this fantastic pamphlet, which I was reading about the revolution in Spain. A guy named Tom Wetzel, I believe, and he.
Oh, you shared it on Twitter.
What?
right? You shared it on Twitter the other day, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Yeah, I did share it. A guy named Tom Wetzel. He was talking about he wrote this fantastic pamphlet on the revolution in Spain, and mentions the Soviet Union. He was contrasting it. He describes the Soviet system of socialism as basically, he calls it the coordinator class, and people we would call essentially like upper managers and like consultants and people, those type of assholes who I'm sure we're all familiar with. We've all worked with them. Those sort of like, higher ups who like aren't owners. They still are technically wage laborers, but their entire existence basically depends on, the system of capitalism, basically. The people like, what is his name? The people like the Lumbergs or like the consultants in Office Space, those types. He basically
yeah. It's like basically the fucking general managers and whatnot.
Yeah, he basically described the Soviet Union as like those people being the new ruling class, because it like keeps all of that sort of like machinery of capitalism intact, but just without the actual owners.
Well,
argument, I think, is the left argument, and it's actually pretty nice. Like many people have disputed it, attempted to dispute it, because they said, like, wait a fucking second, like classes are defined through the relationship to the means of production, and like those people didn't have like a different relationship to the means of production because they were also workers, and it just shows you that like those people were the ones who were doing the planning and who had all the fucking so-called social capital. They were the ones who were pulling the fucking strings. They were the ones who were making all these fucking decisions and whatnot. Like this is a big deal, and people and like all even the tankies that like might be listening that fucking hate our guts at the moment. They won't disagree. They won't disagree with the fact that Soviet system was still extremely alienating to the people. They felt alienated. And they felt like, what the fuck? I'm so detached from the system. That's why there were so many people who were like 90% of the people who like what's the word, like who were against the system, who wanted to go away to escape. Dissidents. Yeah, 90% of Soviet Union dissidents were leftists, basically. The other 10 were literal nationalists and Nazis and fascists, but 90% of them were anti-party socialists, as sometimes they refer to themselves. It's like there are many like underground organizations like Spartak in Russian, which was like an anti-party socialist club, political club, and they were like gathering together and talking about how like Brezhnev sucked and how we should liberate like the people from the party.
Man, fuck Brezhnev. Fuck both, would you?
Like all of this like weird detachment, from the people is the reason, like, is a valid argument on your side, Barbie, for claiming that it is actually debatable whether the Soviet Union was dictatorship of the proletariat.
I think a lot of the sort of the original like first batch of like international brigaders were actually dissidents. Apparently, they were like communists who went to the Soviet Union semi-reluctantly. And like Stalin sort of said, okay, let's send these people to like a war zone. And like when I read that, they it was framed as this thing of like, oh, like leftists glorify this thing, but this is actually proving it's not so glorious. And in fact, it actually improved my opinion of them, which is ironic.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean,
an
my
interesting
opinion was already pretty high, but that only made it go up. Well, I thought that was an interesting factoid just to add on to that. But yeah, it's just like the whole argument that there wasn't private owners, so it wasn't capitalism. How can it be capitalism if there's no private owners? Like that's a very that's a very sort of like
basic
and nothing in. That's like the scene in like the kids movie where it says, "Oh, there's nothing in the rule book that says a dog can't play basketball." It's kind of like, and it's like you're kind of missing the point if like that's your sort of general argument, because a big part of like this whole thing is like alienation, and a lot of people don't read the theory of alienation in this day and age. And like, if you read the theory of alienation, then it's just like objectively, like the Soviet Union and whatnot failed to eliminate alienation. I mean, there's really just no way to put it.
So even if it
And
had,
I'd like to remind people 2 points. First of all, remember the fucking Trotsky split? It was basically like one of his main arguments, and the reason why he got traction in this, like in the Bolsheviks and among the other leftists, was the fact that, hey, what about Soviet democracy? We abolished that shit. It's not democratic enough. Let's like we are becoming like bureaucratized. Even if you don't agree with his statement and analysis, there is a point here that like. Again, the same fucking point. Alienation. People still felt alienated under the existing system. And if you look at the modern critics of socialism, either they like go into economics and fail miserably trying to prove any points, right? Because we fucking know our shit, and we know that like we know like Marx wrote a bunch of stuff which is correct. A bunch of anarchists, Kropotkin and Proudhon, wrote a bunch of shit which is still relevant and correct. We got the fucking economy part like completely well. We have Cockshot, we have so many people that contributing to the theory still. Many people like what I hear as a citizen of an ex-Soviet republic is not an economic argument, but rather political. An argument that the system is repressive, the system is undemocratic, and so on and so on and so on. Like, and so basically discussing the democratic part, discussing the political structure part, is, in my opinion, one of the most important in the to understand what do we do with socialism and communism in the 21st century. Is understanding how do we reorganize the society from this political and social standpoint, not necessarily only through economic.
well, do you think the USSR stands as when we try to do what you're saying? Does the USSR stand as an example to work towards, or something to avoid?
I would say the Soviet Union.
I'd say both. In various areas, I'd say both.
Provides I'd say it provides a lot of lessons. I don't think it's something that we should like try to emulate. Because I don't think we should try to like emulate, in the United States or Australia in 2018, the actual like existing conditions of the Soviet Union at any given point in its history, because that's just like nonsensical. I don't think any serious person. I don't think any serious person believes that. But I think what merits studying the Soviet Union is sort of the circumstances that led to its sort of what the tankies would call revisionism, but I think what we would call just sort of its sort of degeneration, I guess, just the sort of crises in leadership and sort of, like the fact that it was like, a backwards agrarian country and like the revolution in Europe failed, so it was kind of left isolated. So it had to go through its sort of surrogate capitalist phase with the NEP and shit like that, its industrialization. It was pretty obvious that it was going to come out like kind of shit. I mean, like, from a materialist analysis, like there was really like no way that like that the Soviet Union was gonna like come out great. I mean, the whole thing kind of they were kind of like rested their whole hopes on like Germany going communist and then helping them, because Germany was like the big industrial powerhouse of Europe.
Well, here's what I was thinking along that similar line, is that, and I like to quote something directly. I memorized this quote just for the occasion to use it, but I'm paraphrasing a bit, and I'm probably not word for word, but it's very similar. It's to quote Rosa Luxemburg directly: the biggest mistake of the Bolshevik Party and Lenin and his comrades is the lack of democratization in the lower portions of society. Only through democracy can we achieve success. I can think of no worse decision than to stifle the democratic process of the younger proletariat. And as such, it is not through the repression of democracy that one secures the worker state, but enslaves it. For only through a vibrant democratic exchange can we truly achieve socialism. Via this method, the only eventuality I can see is a generation that are slaves to a central committee.
Fucking ultras, am I right? XDDDDD.
XD. But I think
Ultras
what
and
Rosa
Suicide
says
Watch.
is what Rosa says is correct. I mean, I probably got it completely wrong. I was doing it from memory, but that was basically it. We need to allow opposing views to clash. We need Soviets to actually be Soviets.
I think a lot of people kind of underestimate the sort of symbiotic relationship that capitalism and authoritarianism have. I think
Yeah, they do.
relationship is like really underestimated with a lot of people.
Yeah, but also I'd like to make a very important point to what you said, because in my opinion, if Soviet Union actually went the way and like started democratizing, for example, bringing back Soviets after the Civil War, you could easily have expected another civil war erupting easily, because you would give a platform for anti-socialists to operate around the democratic institutions.
Well, there
And
almost
so
was like
basically,
a third. There almost was a third Russian Revolution in July. Some Spiridonova and some left SRs came this close to like overthrowing the Bolshevik government, but they sent in like the Latvian Red Guards or something, and they like that stopped before just in the nick of time.
This was what I was saying. Like Rosa's writing there, I thought was quite good, because I sort of read through it, and she came up with the arguments for Lenin. In fact, in that whole part, she was actually very pro-Bolshevik. Besides that one bit I read out, she supported the revolution everywhere else, which is what I found so strange, considering I had just read.
Dude, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Rosa said something mean about Lenin, so she deserved to die. Read Lenin Ed.
Oh fuck! Shit! All right, I've got a self-crit.
Jesus fucking Christ!
No, seriously.
Immediately, you fucking ultra left-con piece of shit.
No, but I was reading through it, and it was really interesting because, you know, I just read Leninism or Marxism, and like, she fucking tore him a new one. I was like, oh boy. And then the next bit, she's talking about the Russian Revolution, and she's singing his praises. I'm like, whoa, okay, that's a bit of a U-turn. Just a bit, yeah. I was like, but besides her part about the Central Committee, I agree with you actually that oh, Eugene's gone. He's gone back to work. But what he said regarding that is, I agree.
Do we need him for this to be live? Or can we just continue on our own? Like, is he essential for?
We continue. We just keep going.
Oh, okay, cool.
We're still broadcasting.
We're still broadcasting, yeah. So basically, the thing with Lenin was, I think, actually, Muke did a video on this too. It's basically that Lenin had the material conditions he had to work with, and I think that he did a lot of things right. He did better than... Oh, he's back. I think Rose's criticism was quite legitimate regarding that. And of course, I can understand the argument why they didn't democratize. But at the same time, there was a big movement, in my opinion, towards a more centralized state anyway in the Soviet Union. They had to, in order to survive. The only mistake I think Lenin actually made was the land redistribution. But again, that's a historical argument. But the point that really it boiled down to was the Soviet Union came from that. Literally, a country split into a million pieces. Everything's fucked. The economy's trash. 90% of the country can't read. Within 30
90.
years, within 30.
Dude, not 90. 95 or something.
Exactly.
It was insane.
Within 30 years, you have an almost 100% literacy rate. You have a fucking mass industrialized economy, and you have the position as one of the world's superpowers. Now, some people
it's all good. I haven't like finished making my point about democracy, because in my opinion there is it's a very big issue, because like I've never ever thought that the biggest threat to democracy would be democracy. But fucking hell, it seems like it. That's the paradox of leftism. And in my opinion, there is a big reason, there is an interesting thing to observe here. If we see that, like, basically, if you look at the revolutionary period, and you look at democratic period, like, of Soviets, like, between October Revolution, February Revolution, you know, that period of when there were two governments, basically, you could see that the majority of people, majority of representatives in the Soviets were leftists. Not necessarily Bolsheviks, but leftists. Revolutionary socialists, Bolsheviks, and occasionally center-left, Mensheviks. But most of them were revolutionary socialists, and most of them supported socialism, and, they were cool guys. The minority of them were right-wingers. Minority. So French that they reverted to, trying to undermine the socialists, and a lot of them went to prison, and I believe that's for a good reason, because they were trying to, coup d'etat the fuck out of everyone. And then you saw a giant split. When the revolution is over, you have the civil war because your country is split in half. This is the problem I see here, and the solution I see here is that we must look not only at the political structures to undermine when considering radical social and political and economic change, but also the cultural aspects of it. As sniff, 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 and so on, ideology,
Yes.
Ideology.
That things that we have to
Fuck.
It, in my opinion, is the reason why we cannot have a revolution tomorrow. Is that the people exist, we all exist in this ideology, we all attempt to resist it, and in my opinion, and we have always attempted to build our own ideologies and our own outlook on life, often successfully. In my opinion, what we must do is we must reinvent the idea of ideological combat and ideological warfare. And by warfare, I mean building, how this dual government stuff, We must create not the dual government, but the dual culture.
I'm sorry to
take whatever we want from the capitalist culture and create the proletariat internationalist culture, which will be the basis of
I'm sorry.
realism.
I'm sorry.
Whatever form it may take.
Someone, Sputnik, in the chat section was asking, "Why are you guys streaming at 7 a.m.?" And I'm like, "Because it's 9 p.m. in Aussie land, my dude." He says, "Well, it's 7 a.m. in the land that matters, freedom land." And I said, "Fuck the USA! It's falling to either fascism or liberalism."
And so, my point. Yes, Yanks get the bullet too. Yanks is like capitalists. Fuck the relationship to the capital. Yanks die. So basically, my argument is that we must look at the ways the ideology and structure functions, and attempt to not to demolish it, but rather build on our own terms and create on our own terms. Culture without capital, culture separate from it. We have the platforms for it. We have and it's happening on its own while we're speaking. And I believe that this will be a major, the biggest fucking underminer of capital itself. It's death of intellectual property. It is uncontrollable, chaotic, connections between people, cultural exchange. What we're having now, fucking hell, this is impossible. This would be impossible 20 years ago. I'm walking in Minsk, going back to my work, talking to a bunch of communists online. It's. I believe that this is the main thing that will be a key to the revolution.
Idiots talking about communism on Google Plus. That's gonna be. We're gonna be we're gonna be the revolutionary subject, guys.
No. It is the creation of a separate culture. We're just the foundation of it,
I think you're right. I think a culture of having the freedom to discuss and to create new ideas is really important, because if there's just some building that's acting as an echo chamber where a bunch of men in suits say, yeah, we're definitely socialists, no need to allow the workers in here to tell us no, you're going to create some kind of a degenerated workers state.
Trot detected. Big on trot.
Oh god, no, I'm turning into a trot. What have I done?
Out of here.
All I'm going to say is that could possibly lead to the idea that online leftists may become the modern socialist theorists. Could you imagine?
No, I actually refuse to accept this. If that happens, it's going to blow my brains out.
I know, exactly. So could you imagine it?
I believe that what you're saying is pretty close to what I envision, but not really internet, leftist, but rather every single individual. Because if this sort of, cultural project will actually be successful, and we this could guarantee the creation. Like, the problem with centralized democratic systems is that they can degenerate and fall into tyranny. This is the problem with liberalism, and we have been doing the same fucking thing with the socialist experiments, like with representative democracies and whatnot. We must rely on decentralized democratic processes, the ones that are completely autonomous. And to guarantee the safety of those systems, we must rely on mobilization of people, mobilization of working class, and we must guarantee that this working class is able to maintain the system on its own, without any supervision, without any centralization. I'm not saying that we must decentralize the economy, but rather the decision-making processes, and promote autonomy of different political and economic subjects, as well as autonomy of individuals in those systems.
Yeah,
that's a mouthful, but
it's like I said earlier. I think a lot of people underestimate the relationship between authoritarianism and capitalism. I think, that's why I think they made people made the analogous comparison between Stalinism and Bonapartism after the French Revolution. Yes. They sort of saw those similarities there. That kind of ties in with Trotsky's degenerated worker state thing. And I feel like,
exactly.
I feel like if you just have this, this type of socialism, that it's just a cabal of criminals basically, just running the whole thing, then I think that's bound to revert back to capitalism at some point. In my opinion, if there's any one moment where the Soviet Union just kind of fell from grace, it would be 1933, I think, when the Politburo secretly just removed the party maximum, which was the maximum wage that party members were allowed. You could just get paid whatever you wanted after that. And at that point, it was basically just only a matter of time, in my opinion.
Yeah, before that, 27, when the whole, it's a personal thing, it's my personal beef with the socialist state of Soviet Union. It's the end of the politicization program, when in 1927, a bunch of about 100 people who were prominent figures of science, culture, politics, were basically driven to the outskirts of the city of Minsk and shot.
Did you just imply that Belarusians have a culture?
After that, no.
The man was eating borscht for his lunch break. That's culture right there.
That's culture. That's Russian.
That was culture too.
Basically, just imagine, how can a country in the span of less than 100 years go from 90% of its people speaking native language and using it for government purposes, everybody knowing the language, everybody running on it and creating art and whatnot, to a current state where the language is pretty much dead and used by a bunch of liberals in the opposition to the government, and some literal fascists who are friends with them. That's it. That's what happened. That's what's happened in a very short span of time. So, and you're looking at it and thinking to yourself, what the fuck is going on? How could they, how were they able to do this? And to do this, you must have a preset infrastructure. You must have, all the institutions up and running beforehand. And it all happened during the Civil War, basically, And so I believe that there is no such thing as Soviet Union falling from grace, becoming state capitalist, it was the problem with the system and the processes that were run there in general. It's like the logical conclusion.
So the system you're talking about, though, was this system a dictatorship of the proletariat, or was this system some balked other thing that you're talking about?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know the nature of it. Like, it's basically, in my opinion, this system I'm referring to, all those systems, I must say, were originally proletarian because they were done by the workers and all of that stuff, you know. But I would
kind of, again, you know, if we ask the question, was Soviet Union or any of like its fellow travelers a dictatorship of the proletariat, we have to define what a dictatorship of the proletariat is. And so what would we say is a dictatorship of the proletariat? How would we define that? Because let's answer that question and then compare and contrast.
Well, in my opinion, like, I would be the first to say, because like I have a very short thing to say. It's like, we must understand it through the comparison to the dictatorship of the capitalist class. The dictatorship of the capitalist class is realized by, you know, institutions that are created to guarantee the economic interests of a specific class, you know, of in this case, capitalist class. And I don't really see the mass democracy kind of thing, you know, proletarian democracy erupting out of the October Revolution. You know, I saw that the people really thought that they did, you know, and you could make an argument that early Soviet Union did have it. But like, when was this? Like, right after the revolution, when the civil war was going on, when the whole state apparatus, culture, press, government institutions were weaponized to fight the counter-revolution? No, that's not when you have democracy. That's when you have weaponized states, you know. Like, is it NEP when you have literal capitalists running around? Maybe, but again, how was it managed? It was managed through a party that we defined was really detached from the people again, right? And then we had a classless society, basically classless society during Stalin, when after the collectivization and the expropriation of all the property that was left, right? It was basically stateless society, but not stateless society, classless society. After that, there were no capitals; there were just workers. But then again, where was the democracy then? Where was it was just the party democracy, inner party democracy. And would you consider to participate in which you must be a part of this particular institution? And so I don't really see any of that anywhere in this whole, timeline. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I agree. I don't think you can make I don't think, a reasonable person can make the assertion that, your average worker in the Soviet Union really had, any say in terms of, now you can't make the argument that, Ivan Ivanov, the factory worker, has, any say in how things are run, except maybe in, a few minor decisions at, the factory level. But he doesn't really have any political or economic power in that system.
Yes, that's institutions. That's the point. It's not enough to have workers running things. You must have institutions that are guaranteeing the powers. Right. To maintain capitalism, you must have institutions that guarantee such system to function. You must have a judiciary system. You must have a parliament and the executive powers. That are separate and they run on representatives, Roman system of republic, all that good stuff, So all of it guarantees the class relations. I don't see any of those institutions being set up in Soviet Union to guarantee such conditions to maintain. You could argue, look at that. Look, easily, party is literally controlling the executive and the legislative branch, easily, right. And all of the branches, they control one organization. And the unions are also there. Sorry, I want to say about the unions first. And the unions are also there, but they are there to fulfill a function of mobilization of the working class for productivity and whatnot, They were controlling that the workforce was productive, which is not like control over a system, but rather control over the people.
The unions are more like the state's ambassadors into the workforce, more than actually being some sort of representative of the workers themselves. That's how, like, trade unions work in like any. That's how trade unions work in like any dictatorship. Really, I mean, that's what like the Nazis did. That's what they do in like Saddam's Iraq, or used to do in like those type of countries.
Yeah, all in Australia with the liberal unions, they did the same thing. They guaranteed the control, like the one that's controlled by the coalition.
Oh, American definition of liberal. Gotcha. Okay.
Yes, the American definition of liberal, and like the coalition government that has its own unions, right?
Oh, the right-wing unions. Do you mean?
Yes, the right-wing unions, exactly, and
yeah,
the
gotcha.
vast majority of Israeli unions, that are also right-wing, that are there to guarantee status quo by providing nice things to maintain the authority over the working class. It's the same thing. I see more similarities between a right-wing union with the Soviet Union than with the left-wing unions in the Soviet Union. Unions in the Soviet Union, I mean, they're more similar to the trade unions in Soviet Union. Look more like right-wing unions today. It's the same function. And so there are no institutions to guarantee the control of the working class over the social life or political life or economic life, which we actually want to do as leftists. We keep forgetting about that.
So in the Soviet Union, you'd have a worker who could have as much control over his workplace and its safety and whatnot, but because he himself couldn't decide the quotas or go to Moscow and say, no, we're not making this coal or whatnot before, because he didn't have that political power in a institution that didn't exist, then the Soviet Union didn't have a dictatorship of the proletariat and wasn't socialist either.
Well,
it was socialist. The mode of production was still socialist. That's the point.
Sorry, yeah, I got you now.
Yeah, it wasn't capitalist. There were no markets, and Jason's argument for socialist, work, you could define it this way, right? We're here, in this sort of case, we are really talking about political freedoms and dictatorship of the proletariat, which is also which is an extremely fun discussion. I never thought that it would be so interesting to talk about in the Soviet Union this way. Actually, yeah, to your point, what you said, TK, I wouldn't actually argue that the worker had control over his own workplace, but rather existing government institutions not controlled by him were working towards giving him as much nice things as possible. It's you weren't really in control over the health and safety at your workplace. It was a health and safety engineer, a specialist who was working for the union.
Oh, okay.
Really, it was a separate.
The thing with the Soviet system of socialism as practiced in the Soviet Union, my thing is that it basically relegates the laborer to a supporting role in his own emancipation, basically. And Trotsky puts this quite well in the infamous Chapter 8 of his Terrorism and Communism. He describes it as militarization of labor. I'm not entirely sure if that was just intended to be a temporary civil war measure or something more permanent, but either way, it was more permanent.
I don't really remember the context of 8th chapter, but I do remember reading the book, and I remember it being more about it was an answer to Kautsky's critique of the war communism, which was an economic system during the Civil War. And so, in my opinion, they were referring to Civil War institutions.
It is a response to Kautsky's claims, and it does talk about the Civil War. But the one Chapter 8, it's deceptive actually, because he's responding to Kautsky's argument that Kautsky makes the argument that what did he say? He said Kautsky said that forced labor is ineffective, and Trotsky responds by saying, well, it's not forced labor. It's basically obligatory labor, because he describes it as oh, well, this isn't this is communism, so it's like there's no unemployment, and that's the way that he frames it. But every now and then throughout that chapter, he lets it slip up, and he describes something in a way that describes how it actually functions. And I can't remember the exact quote, but he describes it as like, basically workers just being, like I said, just like supporting roles in their own emancipation. And that's why, the whole term militarization of labor is actually really accurate, because the average worker, just your average Joe Schmo coal miner, is roughly analogous to like a grunt in a military in that scenario. Just the guy who's supposed to like take orders and like put the plans of the higher ups into existence to carry those out. That's what he's relegated to, and that's the problem with that system. I mean, that just wasn't going to last forever without it eventually lapsing to capitalism, in my opinion.
I agree with you, but I must correct you one point. One point that you made, which is a bit inaccurate about the forced labor thing. In the book, Trotsky argues that the labor wasn't called subordinate
robot mode.
You've
Autobots,
got.
Hear me now? Hello?
Apologies, everybody's
There
going
you go.
robotic.
Fuck.
Oh, you're back.
Yeah, something I got wrong about.
So basically, there were such things that were called subotniks and voskresniks, which is the socialist Saturdays and socialist Sundays, which were days of unpaid labor, which you were asked to do. And Trotsky argues that people volunteer.
Oh, he's gone again.
He's gone again. There we go. Oh,
And he's gone.
Hello.
May you rest in peace.
What about now?
rip.
Fucking hell. I can hear you perfectly.
You've gone Robotnik again. I might have to get you to.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're back.
Before I disappear again, the labor was voluntary, as Trotsky argued. Like, I'm not really sure whether it was legitimately voluntary, but from what he wrote, it was. But he still says that the reason it was voluntary was because of the mobilization of the people.
Yeah. The Subotniks was like the Subotniks were for like extreme circumstances caused by the Civil War. The Subotniks are like fairly like kind of just like an outlier. Yes, has more to do with the fact that like the worker just doesn't have that much say in the overall conduction of the economic planning, besides just carrying those plans out.
Yeah, but like also I would like to connect it to your previous point. It was voluntary labor that was still like it was run on mobilization of the working class, and mobilization was used to militarize labor. The problem with mobilization and the militarization of labor that people will stop caring at one point. They will stop being mobilized. This is when all revolutions start to crumble. It's like the Zizek's argument for what's going to happen on day 2, on next day, next morning. How is it going to run? It's this point. You can have mobilized people like on the fucking, getting ready to like wrapping up those fucking guillotines. And what next? What's going to happen tomorrow? How are they going to act tomorrow? How are they going to live tomorrow? And what decisions they're going to make? This is the point about like the system failing eventually.
Right.
Yeah.
This is sounding like this idea I had of self promotion here. Just putting it out there, writing myself a book, blah blah blah.
Fucking petty bourgeois piece of shit.
Yeah.
Fucking self cred or die.
Oh, it's just this idea of treating a worker just as a worker, like you're a part of this glorious Soviet Union. You are a steel worker. You turn like raw steel into girders. That's all you know how to do. That's all you need to do. Whereas what I think it should be is you have a worker that's finished his half day, that then carries his rifle that he uses to defend his neighborhood and his family and whatnot, carries his rifle off to the local
I'm sorry.
Soviet.
You just described that. You just said that, and the fucking like Gremblo meme just like pops into my head. Just completely reflexively.
Well,
It's like this guy leaves the worker controlled factory carrying his rifle and helmet and whatnot off to the local Soviet to stand as a local member for his area. He's not just a worker, he's also a politician and in the army. Yet in the Soviet Union, it seemed to be that you were either a soldier, a politician, or a worker, and there was this big division between the three. Not like a class system, but a caste system. And I've forgotten my original point because you interrupted me with this fucking Gremblo meme. What the fuck is Gremblo? What is this?
well,
People, can you hear me? Hello?
yeah.
Yeah.
I have to go back to work now. Capital system is pressuring me to go back and do some labor, people.
Oh,
Alrighty.
poor wage cock. See you later.
Deal with
It was,
wage cut.
Thank you for coming, Eugene.
Thank you for hosting. It was fun discussion. I love you all. See you next one. See you in the next
Yeah.
one, people.
Yeah,
Bye.
later, Eugene. Yeah, here's my thing though, TK, was that when I sort of look at that sort of system, I agree with you. I 100% agree. The only difference I would say is that regarding the Soviet military, because this is the one area I do know something about, the big problem was there was a caste system, but it wasn't a caste system of, how to put it, the traditional sense. You see, the Red Army was still a peasant army right up until the collapse of the USSR. It was still a predominantly peasant army. It went through in 3 phases. Every conscription had 3 years service. Everybody got conscripted into the army for 3 years. There were more and more deferrals over time, of course, naturally, as more revisionism spread. Yep, but in a sense, there were 3 year tiers of conscription. Now, the only people who were professional soldiers in the Soviet army, most of the time, were officers. Now, that's the thing. The Soviet army had a higher proportion of officers to men than pretty much any other army. They didn't have a professional NCO corps. Okay. Now, this during the revolution, this of course was different because everybody was a peasant army. It was a giant peasant army, but the problem was the peasant army stayed on after the revolution was completed. They didn't have a professionalized force, because that would be against socialist policy, like what you're describing. We wanted workers' army, armed work, right? So the problem was, however, that meant that there was a very distinct divide between officers and enlisted men. You see, the thing is, when they professionalized the Red Army after the military reforms of the 30s, they professionalized the officer corps, but kept the lower ranks conscripted. There were very little NCOs. NCOs were usually promoted. The NCOs were elected. Sergeants were elected, and they were done so usually after they attended a special NCO training course after being selected for particular aptitude, such as tank crew, for example. Very similar. Whereas, there of course was a large influx of officers in the mid 30s. There were lots of rapid promotions in the mid 30s. It's not like our glorious Uncle Joe had the entire general staff shot or anything. That didn't happen, and if it did, they deserved it. Anyway, moving on. Point is, what happened then is you now have a massive divide between a standing army that's comprised entirely of officers, and then you have the remaining army, which is conscripts being rotated through every 3 years. Now this had one effect of everybody being armed, and everyone was trained as a soldier naturally, so they had one element of that constitution still there. But the other problem was it also meant that there was no ability for workers to sort of break out of that sort of mold as such. There was a very sort of elitist strain in the professional army, because there wasn't any standing privates, there wasn't any standing corporals, there wasn't any standing grunts. It was basically the entire army was a conscript army ruled over by a cadre of elite officers who were all professionals. Now, besides that being an incredibly inefficient system, the division it creates is quite bad.
That's actually like not too far off from like what we have like today, you know.
In the U.S. Army, it's getting that way, and you can see that in the quality of the U.S. defense. Ironically, defense quotation marks forces.
I don't know what you're fucking talking about, dude. Like the fucking Iraq was giving us the hairy eyeball, man.
Oh yeah, fucking deserved it, man.
They're defending America from like 9,000 kilometers away.
The fucking Philippines in like 1905, they said mean things about our mom on the internet. We had to go invade them.
Don't worry, guys. We're reducing the amount of our army by sending them around the world to die. American-US policy right there.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Re-enlistment numbers in the US military are pretty much at the lowest they've ever have been. I mean, I have a friend who lives in Texas who is literally NRA Star-Spangled Dick hanging out the side of his pickup truck, Texan, patriot, member of the U.S. Army. And like, I asked him the other day, I was like, man, so you re-enlisting? Hell no. Fuck that. And the officer corps and shit of the U.S. Army is bureaucratized to all fucking hell, and the NCOs and the riflemen are doing their stint and then quitting.
Yeah, there's a fantastic podcast that all of you should listen to called what is it called?
What an odd title for a podcast. Fuck, what is it called?
No,
I'm starting one on my channel called Fuck.
It's called "What a Hell of a Way to Die," which is a reference to an old U.S. airborne paratrooper song from the Second World War. It's basically like these guys who have been in the army for a long time, and I'd say they're kind of like Eugene Debs type democratic socialist. If I had to put I had to put a label on their specific ideology, that's the impression I get. But they don't really explicitly say what their ideological leanings are. But it's an absolutely fantastic podcast, and all of you should check it out. I'll put the link in the chat. Actually, one sec.
We've also got a comment from the chat, and the red mushroom. I've been trying to fit in your question. We'll get to it. And the one I'm talking about from the Left Review, it's not a question, it's a statement. He says, Left Review says, volunteer army makes it less likely for soldiers to defect in a revolution like they did in Russia. Therefore, the draft is left wing. Change my mind.
Okay, so I would like to say this. The draft has a very good effect in terms of in creating, and I'm going to use very tanky wording here, but it's true. The draft is really good for us in a capitalist society, because most people who are drafted to fight in a capitalist society do not want to be. You only have to see that with Vietnam. They don't want to be there. They don't want to play. The thing is, a volunteer army, however, in a socialist state, I think is very important, because one, ideologically speaking, a volunteer army in a socialist state is sound. But more to the point, a professional standing army of all ranks and all classes and all units is very important for the defense of the proletariat and for the ensuring of the dictatorship of the proletariat, by the fact that in times of attack, when you're at war, it allows for all of those privates and corporals and sergeants who are in the army, who are professionally in the army, to suddenly be rapidly promoted into NCO and leadership positions, followed by a mass mobilization of the workers and peasants of the USSR to meet the invading Nazi threat. Guess what? They didn't have a professional army, and the officer corps was decapitated at its head, and so they were pretty much... The Soviets... I got into a massive fight the other night with a few people discussing this, but the Soviets really did pay for their lack of adoption of a professional army post-revolution. During pre-revolution in a capitalist society, the draft is very good for us because it exposes the contradictions of capitalism and it exposes the imperialist agenda.
Vroom, 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 accelerate.
Yeah, it does. It does. But the draft had a massive effect in World War One. Like, you only have to see the increase in left-wing thought across all of the major imperialist powers soldiers. The soldiers in the major imperialist powers during the First World War and during the Russian Revolution especially, they were radicalized to this point where they were pitted against each other in this brutal war. And the Christmas truce is the best part of this. In a letter home, a German soldier wrote to himself, wrote to his family. It says, we met the British today, and it was very interesting. We commented on how silly all of this is, that the working class of each side should be meeting each other and killing each other for men who've never even seen a battlefield. How sad it all is. And, I'm just sort of thinking to myself, like, well then. So, in answer to his question, yes, the draft is very, very good for us in the capitalist phase. But once the dictatorship of the proletariat is established, a professional standing army, I guess you could say military vanguardism, I guess. A professional standing army of revolutionary soldiers is a necessity, I think.
So volunteers, you would say?
Yes, indeed. A volunteer army post-revolution. That being said, I would also have a draft, but I would make it a very short one, like a 1-year draft. So workers' militias would still be a massive part, even post-revolution, just for self-regulation and security and so forth. But basically, I would have it so that everybody has the capacity to fight and defend the revolution should it be necessary, but having a standing army for, peacekeeping, border security, running exercises, maintaining operational readiness. And
I like the some of the stuff that the Kurds are doing with their the HPCs. I forget what that acronym stands for, but it's basically like it's sort of like localized sort of people's militias affiliated with individual communes, and they fulfill basically like peacekeeping duties and also as like a garrison in the local area in the event of that. And they act as a supplementary role alongside the YPG and whatnot. It seems like you're advocating something sort of vaguely similar to that.
Yeah, only I'm not an anarchist. I'm talking on a sort of a more Luxemburgist, Trotskyist, leaning towards Leninist kind of model of state. So we're talking about a centralized state here, but we would have definitely something, yes. Basically, it would be very similar, like different military districts, different towns and stuff would have a local battalion in charge, like similar to a National Guard, I suppose, in charge of regional duties and policing duties. And of course, they would have a standing force available to be deployed at any time. But the main army would have a professional standing army of professional divisions of all ranks, from private to... And this is post-revolution, but rather ironically, I think that Comrade Red Mushroom, I think that an accelerationist position regarding the draft is actually a good thing. I'd love to see our countries return the draft purely for the effect it would have.
No, that's never going to happen. We're never going to get into a war big enough involving the draft at this point. Like that's sorry, what?
I know. I was going to try and make this comment before, but Eugene was on a roll and I didn't want to stop him. It was during the discussion about Dengism and stuff. I says I've given up on accelerationism via that world war. My only hope now.
Oh no! I'm so
only-
sorry. That must
I
be
know.
devastating.
I'm terrified. I'm terribly devastated.
Oh,
My
you must
only-
be fucking just like suicidal over
I
like
am.
the
I'm
DB
very.
conversation
I'm a
with North Korea.
Posadist. I'm a Posadist. I'm suicidal anyway.
Um,
No, my point is this. My hope now is that the Dengists and stuff are actually accelerationists in disguise, and once they have achieved full domination over the US and Chinese economy, they're like, right, we're crashing it. We're bringing it down. We're accelerating the
Crashing this
contradictions.
plane with no survivors.
Left
Exactly.
Review has a good point here. He says, "What I meant though is, if you had a revolution today, almost none of the military would defect because they're all petite bourgeois, right-wing volunteers, and so it's be leftists with Walmart guns." It'd be leftists with Walmart guns versus a professional military filled with the type of guys who went to Charlottesville. But the type of guys that went
Yeah,
to
if you did it
Charlottesville,
tomorrow, but nobody's saying, "Hey, we should try to overthrow the government tomorrow." Like that's what the
Yeah.
whole like science of praxis is.
And again, this is my point that I had to make very distinctly. I agree with you in terms of now. A volunteer army is obviously reactionary in a modern capitalist system because they are the perpetuators and supporters of it. Now, that being said,
Well, there's a pretty big caveat to that because like at least here in the United States, I don't know what it's like in Australia, but like the army here is like kind of like voluntary, but like voluntary TM because like people join because they call it the poverty draft basically.
Yeah. That I was gonna say that has been my. I know that has gotten me labeled as a class traitor more than once for saying, look, like re-enlistments are down pretty much in every Western military across the world. Everybody's just looking to get out. Like literally.
Yeah, like my friend Commissar Kitchen, who's a part-time co-host on my show Barracks Communism. Uh, he's an Afghanistan veteran. He was a tanker, I believe, and he basically joined because they said they would pay for like his college debts, basically, and that's like why like a good chunk of people
Oh,
go
by the way,
into that sort of thing.
by the way, Barbie, I was sorry to cut you off, TK. Just before you, I'll let you go in a second. Just wanted to say, Barbie, look, I know this is a bit of cross self promotion here, but if I could get an invite to one of your streams if I'm awake, I'd love to come on.
Yeah, can I also go on Barracks Communism? I volunteer. I will send you my resume.
I'd love to come on because
my resume is in fact like 10 hours of YouTube poops.
yeah, but that's the thing. That's the thing, Barbie, because like it's always been Americans in coming onto our stream. I think maybe it's time that we come onto your guys' streams and say hi.
Fucking oath, cunt. We're gonna fucking
can't fuck yeah, boy.
Yeah, boy.
Here come the Strayans. But yeah, no, I was saying that. I have been sort of labeled a class traitor more than once for defending the average grunt in the US.
It's not
military.
even defending. That's just what happens. I mean, that's just the way it is. That's just kind of like
the military, right, offers them this chance to not be put out on the street by college debts or medical bills or whatever it is. Like, your problem? Well, the military will alleviate it so long as you serve us for a bit. But then what happens is you sign on the dotted line and then they say, all right, it's time for you to go to Afghanistan and kill Afghani children so that we can take the oil out of there. They're forced to perpetuate imperialistic capitalism. Just so that, I had a Dan Harmon moment there with the bloody stutter, but they're forced to do these things and perpetuate capitalism just so that they're not out on the street when they get back home.
Yeah, there's this big ideological pushback from partly from official Pentagon and government sources and from sort of right-wing ideologues, conservative ideologues saying, how dare you say that people join the military just to escape poverty? They think it's this disrespectful thing. It's all bullshit. Ask anyone who has been in the military, they'll tell you, yeah, a lot of us join up just for to make life easier, basically, because it is partially offers an escape. All this stuff about we join because of patriotism. It's bullshit. It's not true at all. It's just propaganda.
I was at one point considering joining the Australian Reserves just so that I could pay my fucking bills. But then I realized,
Yeah.
like, if I'm in the reserves, or if I actually join, the main like Australian Defence Force, America, led by Trump, and we're back to Trump, ladies and gentlemen. Trump's going to start some war, and then they're going to rope Australia into it, and then I'm off to fight for Turnbull and Trump. And it's like, well, no, I don't want to do that. Give me a cause. Give me a cause worth fighting, and I will gladly take up arms. But don't send me off to kill children so that people in suits can make dollars.
Well, this is the thing that really gets me. I mean, they honestly, the people who in one breath will say, "Oh yeah, it's perfectly voluntary to go and join up to shoot children." They'll say that in one breath, and then in the next breath they'll say, "Oh, for example, by that same logic, I'm a class traitor." By the same logic. The reason is I'm a salesman. I don't produce any material value whatsoever. In fact, I perpetuate capitalism. I need to self-crit and jump off a bridge. Okay? I exploit people out of their surplus value to survive under capitalism. Technically, I am a leech. Okay?
You're
Now,
probably worse than like a soldier who loses it and kills a bunch of children, to be honest.
exactly. And that's the truth of it. That's it.
Well, like,
but
fuck
the thing is,
salesmen, dude. Like I do not have many good experiences with salesmen.
I know, but that's my thing. I do what I need to do. And I don't see, like, the only people who I can honestly say I hold a sort of grudge against, I would say, would be anyone who is in the military or the state apparatus above, like, I suppose you could say sergeant rank, I guess, and extend that equivalent. Someone who has any effect on organization and policy, someone who does have the ability to turn around and say, "Go fuck yourself," and doesn't. They're the people I have a problem with.
You got a general that sits in the cabinet that can say, Mr. President, we shouldn't attack this spot because there's civilians. And then when they don't, because they know that their paycheck's coming up, those are the kinds of people you don't like.
Exactly, and I'd go further than that. I'd say that certain. I have to say this quietly because I come from a police family, but I'd say that police come under that category too.
Well, actually, it's funny you mention that because there's this whole thing in like there's this whole like culture we have in the United States, like this like colloquially it's kind of known as like the tactical industry, basically.
Tactical.
Yeah, it's like just a bunch of like sorry, it's just a bunch of like fat assholes who like claim that they used to be like military or whatever, and they're like it's basically like just like in a more extreme version of like the brain force thing. It's kind of like just selling to like middle-aged white guys going through a midlife crisis who want to be like Chris Kyle, basically that whole thing.
Oh,
And like,
yes.
there's been this whole like backlash among like American special forces, like Navy SEALs and shit, because a lot of the people who sell that snake oil claim that they come from that. And a lot of these people are pissed off about that because they're supposed to see, like, they recognize that sort of thing as being something more sacred than that. And they see, like, basically marketing that as, like, kind of gross, basically.
Like, side note, in the Nerf community, we get these kinds of people where there'll be someone who's like myself, like I'm trying to buy like this vest that has a molly system so I can have some Nerf mags on it, right? But then like it's kind of tactical, like I'm wearing a vest, it's kind of cool, but that's it, it's just to that level. But then there's people that are way above the level where they're like they buy like X special forces surplus stuff and they put like the metal plates back in, and then they'll stand around the Nerf events looking like operators, and you try to go up to them and talk to them like, "Hey man, how's it going?" It's like, I don't talk to civilians. Like, what the fuck? You're flinging foam at people. We're playing with toys. There's no need to actually act like a special forces tactical asshole.
That's pretty bad. You should see the fucking like airsoft community. It's
that's 10 times worse. Holy shit.
I'm not gonna lie, I need to self-crit here, but kind of would like to play. just saying.
What, airsoft?
Yeah.
Come to
same here,
wherever
that's
it is
fine.
I live and participate in the Nerf thing. It's great. It's good fun.
No, but I will openly admit that in my past, I was one of those tactical kids. And the
Well, you were
reason
a kid
Wait,
though, so
did-
that's
did-
acceptable.
did
We
you
have like
enjoy
grown ass
wearing-
men trying to do it,
Kid-
which is just kind of sad.
Did
Kid
you
in the sense
did
of,
you
like,
enjoy
teenager.
wearing the kit and looking like an operator or a real soldier?
Well, you see,
Or did you wear the kit and put people down for not wearing the stuff you had?
No, because everybody else with me was wearing the same stuff because I was in the Australian Air Force Cadets, and we would go out on exercise with our packs and our camelbacks and our
I
magazine
was gonna make an
pouches.
emu joke, but then I remembered they're flightless birds.
Yeah, they are.
The Air Force cadets that pick an emu for their
Yeah,
fucking mascot.
All I'm gonna say is that. All I'm gonna say to that is, they weren't always flightless birds, but they were after we were done with them.
Oh shit!
Fucking assholes. They learned. Actually, still gonna say I am still working on a basic sort of historical novel. Well, novella, I could say, because it's going to be a shitpost video on YouTube. Let's face it. I am still working on the history of the Second Great Emu War, so heads up for that. But yeah, it's like I still get flashbacks sometimes. It's pretty brutal, man. Like, you know, you get the odd flashback here and there. Like I got one the other day actually. I was walking through the main shopping strip of my town, and I saw a group of people in the sort of the atrium near the fountains, near the big statue in the center of our town, and they were feeding the pigeons, and it was strange seeing all those breadcrumbs on the floor. You know, like
Breadcrumbs on the floor. Kropotkin must be spinning in his grave.
Oh, he's fucking he's fucking he's doing The Exorcist, but you know and like I saw the pigeons all picking up that, and you know that scene from Tigerland, I think it is. You know, freaking you got the pigeons ducking in and out, picking up the pieces of bread, and then I see flashes of big emu beaks grabbing the seed out of my hands, and fucking Jesus, it was terrifying. Those emu prisoners nearly fucking tore my arm off once, but we had a prison riot once. We put 20 of them down. It was not pretty.
Jesus Christ.
But yeah, we did what we had to do. Damn it, TK. You were there too. You
I
saw
know.
it as well as I did.
I know. I was there. When
You were there too, man.
big breakout of 2013 happened, I was up in the tower with my 22 rifle and 1,000 rounds. I had to put them down, man. I had to. Those emus got out and got back into civilization. Oh, there would have been feathers and blood in the streets.
It was fucking horrible, man.
No, dude, like emus unironically are actually like really fucking scary.
Oh, they actually are, dude. They are fucking deadly.
They will tear you asunder if they're mad.
Oh yeah, they like the worst one isn't even the emu. It's their like, you know, we're dealing with wog emus, man. We got
Oh
no,
no!
seriously. Like we're dealing with wog emus because you get like, you know, the emus come up to you and they're like, "Yo, bro, you think I'm fucking bad? I'm gonna get my cousins, man," and you get the fucking cassowary. Holy shit! They've got fucking 6-inch talons on those bad boys. They will actually wreck you.
Nah,
They
mate.
are-
You get one emu, right, and it's a trap, right? If you feed him, he'll run away and grab 50 of his mates and expect, you know, more. Or you don't feed him, he gets mad, he grabs 50 of your mates and he runs up to you, surrounds you, and tears you to shreds.
Yeah, well, emus are actually pretty bad. Like they can be pretty fucking nasty. I mean, I haven't had good experiences with them, real and imagined. But you know, I think it's just a habit of all Australian wildlife. Really, they're just all fucking horrible. Even koalas. Koalas are grumpy little shits, and they're actually very, very dangerous.
All right, what? We're up to about.
We've been going for like we've been going for like 2 hours, man.
Yeah. Do you guys? I think that'd be a good point to wrap up. What do you guys think?
Yeah, agreed. We've been going for a while.
I think
All right.
Sockbar might need to get to bed finally.
Yeah.
What time is it there for you?
It is 8 a.m. It's morning.
Seriously. Hey, Bobby, when's your next episode of Barracks Communism going to be?
We skipped the recording this week. We planned on recording it like Saturday or Sunday, but something came up. So hopefully we'll just record it like, this weekend or whenever. It's very sort of like loose thing.
Yeah, man.
This show is kind of like a pain in the ass to do because it's like, I don't know if it's just because I'm just a lazy piece of shit or not, but it's like I have trouble like coming up with shit to talk about. It's not really like this show where we just kind of ramble for 2 hours. There is like some structure of it. We usually talk about, I have like a set of news stories and then usually some other like big sort of general thing, and we just work with that.
Don't worry, man. Like Australians, like even our news shows have the ability to shitpost and you won't even notice. Like you watch the news and the broadcaster and they'll speak and they'll talk and whatnot. And then 5 minutes later you realize, wait a second, that report about Malcolm Turnbull, he was taking the piss.
Yeah, it's just difficult for me to just find funny stuff to talk about because that is kind of like the whole point is that you don't want to talk about like, if there's like, you don't just want to get like any story to talk about on Barracks. It's just like, oh, it's fucking, you don't want to talk about like Holocaust Memorial Day on episode 5 of Barracks Communism or something like that. No, we generally try to find like funny stories or stories that we can either like funny stories or like kind of big important stories that we can put like some kind of funny twist on.
So
Either
how
that or
about
just
that
doing
Khmer
like,
Rouge,
usually
eh?
do that and then just do something stupid like reacting to Ben Shapiro videos or
fuck.
just looking at Trump Twitter and dumb shit like that.
Yeah. All right.
And finding good stuff conductive to that sort of general idea is harder than I anticipated.
We'll have to see what happens when.
Are you guys in the server for Barracks Communism, the Barracks Communism Discord server?
I don't think so.
I believe I
course
am.
not.
Okay, well, I'll send you guys the invite when we're
Cool.
done with this.
All right, guys. I think that's a good point to wrap up then. So I want to thank all of our guests and especially. So I've lost the list of the guests. I'd like to thank Sockbarb, Pac-Man, Eugene, and Spoogs for joining us. I want to thank everybody in the chat, especially the Red Mushroom and the Left Review. Red Mushroom, sorry I couldn't get to your question. I'll try to answer it at some point in some way. Don't forget to check us out on easternmarshlands.com and to also support, if you'd like to support us on Patreon. Make payments on Patreon, so on and so forth. If you'd like to make a one-time monetary support, you can go to Ko-fi, it's ko-fi.com, and support us that way. It's a one-time payment with money. It helps out a lot, and it really allows us to be able to do, Evening with Comrades and Radio Silence podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and to check out the channels of all the guests that have appeared on An Evening with Comrades. And we're back, ladies and gentlemen.
We're back.
Alrighty,
lads. I'm out. I gotta have dinner. It's been fun.
Catch you all later.
Eat food? That's pretty bourgeois. You fucking.
Yeah, I know, right? Fucking
bourgeois.
gotta laugh.
Shit.
Hello, more LARPing. Bye.